The pen felt heavier than a brick in my 72-year-old hand. Its sleek, silver body was cold, a stark contrast to the boiling shame rising in my throat. My sons, Mark and Jason, stood over me, their shadows falling across the polished mahogany of my sister's dining table. They weren't just shadows, they were vultures. If you believe a mother's love should never be repaid with cruelty, please like this video and subscribe. You won't want to miss how this ends. They called it a formality. Just to make things easier, Mom, Mark had said, his voice smooth as the expensive silk tie knotted at his throat. It helps us divide the assets fairly. Jason, ever his brother's echo, nodded in agreement, avoiding my eyes as he pushed the stack of papers an inch closer. Fairly, the word was a lie, a poisoned dart wrapped in legal jargon. I scanned the lines, my old teacher's eyes struggling with the dense print. Relinquish all claims, sole executors, immediate liquidation. They weren't dividing anything. They were taking everything. They were taking this house, my sister Sarah's house, the last piece of her I had left, this 3-story sanctuary on Birch Street, where Sarah had lived and laughed and eventually, quietly, passed away just 3 weeks ago. She was my big sister, my only family, besides the 2 men who now looked at me like I was a piece of inconvenient furniture. My daughters-in-law, Susan and Karen, sat on the velvet settee across the room, pretending to study their manicured nails. But I saw their quick, hungry glances. They were partners in this. Their whispers had poisoned my sons' minds for years, painting me as a burden, a relic from a simpler time they were desperate to escape. They wanted the money from this house to fuel their lavish lifestyles, the country club memberships, the European vacations, the designer handbags that cost more than my monthly pension. They saw Sarah's home not as a place of memories, but as a cash machine. I looked from their expectant faces to the document. This wasn't just about a house. It was the final, crushing blow in a lifetime of dismissals. I was the mother who raised them alone after their father left, working 2 jobs, patching their scraped knees, proofreading their college essays, and celebrating their every minor victory as if they'd won a Nobel Prize. I was the mother who gave Mark the down payment for his first home and co-signed the disastrous business loan for Jason that nearly cost me my own savings. And now, I was the mother they were erasing. Mom, we don't have all day, Jason prodded, a hint of irritation in his voice. That's what I had become to them. A delay, an obstacle. I thought of Sarah. She never had children, always said she had her hands full with me. She'd made me promise to live here after she was gone, to keep the garden she loved so much, to fill the rooms with light. Don't let them bully you. Ev, she'd said a few months ago, her voice thin but her eyes still sharp. They're Parker men. They see a soft heart and think it's a welcome mat. At the time, I dismissed it as her usual cynicism. Now, her words echoed in the silent room like a prophecy. My hand trembled as I uncapped the pen. What choice did I have? They were my sons, a part of me, a deep, conditioned part, still wanted to believe in their goodness, to think this was just a terrible misunderstanding. But as I looked into Mark's cold, impatient eyes, I saw no misunderstanding. I saw only greed. I signed my name, Evelyn Parker, on the dotted line. The ink was black, like the hole they were carving out of my life. As I pushed the papers back toward them, a tear I hadn't realized was forming fell onto the page, smudging the final letter of my name. Jason quickly snatched the document away, as if my grief might stain it. Mark clapped his hands together, a gesture of finality. Great. That's settled. We'll have the realtor come by tomorrow. They didn't hug me. They didn't offer a word of comfort. They simply gathered their coats, their wives rising to join them, and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the cavernous silence of a house that was no longer mine. The click of the front door was the sound of my world breaking apart. The silence they left behind was heavier than any sound. It pressed in on me, filled with the ghosts of yesterday. I walked through the house, my hand trailing along the floral wallpaper Sarah had picked out in the 80s. Every object was a memory. Every room a chapter of sacrifice my sons had chosen to forget. I stood in the small den, staring at the worn leather armchair where I'd spent countless nights helping a young Mark with his algebra homework. He'd struggled, his frustration often boiling over into tears, and I'd sit with him patiently, hour after hour, until the equations finally clicked. "You're the best, Mom," he'd whispered, his head resting on my shoulder. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw my signature as just another asset to be acquired. The money I'd scraped together from my meager teacher's salary to send him to a prestigious business school, a debt I'd only finished paying off 5 years ago, hadn't bought him wisdom. It had bought him arrogance. Then I moved to the kitchen, the heart of the home. I could almost smell the pot roasts and apple pies I'd made for Sunday dinners, long after the boys were grown and had families of their own. They'd come, bringing their wives and, eventually, my grandchildren, and for a few hours, I could pretend we were still a family. But the conversations were always surface level. Jason would talk about his new car, Karen would complain about their contractor. They'd ask me how I was, but their eyes would be on their phones before I could finish my answer. I remembered the time Jason's tech startup went under. He came to me, 35 years old and utterly broken, convinced his life was over. He was thousands of dollars in debt. I didn't hesitate. I cashed out a portion of my retirement fund, the money I'd earmarked for my own security, for a future where I wouldn't be a burden on anyone. "I'll pay you back, Mom, every penny," he'd promised, tears streaming down his face. He never did. The next year, he and Karen went on a 2-week cruise to the Bahamas. When I gently brought it up, he'd scoffed. "Mom, I have to maintain a certain image for my new clients. It's an investment." My feet carried me upstairs, to the guest room where I'd stayed whenever I helped Sarah after one of her surgeries. The scent of her lavender potpourri still lingered. Sarah saw it all. She saw how they took from me, emotionally and financially, without ever giving back. "You've raised 2 champion takers. Ev," she'd tell me, her voice sharp but not unkind. "You can't keep pouring from an empty cup." But I always found a little more to give. I thought that was my job. I thought that was love. Now, standing in the hallway, looking at the framed photos on the wall, Mark in his graduation cap, Jason at his wedding, the 2 of them as children on a rusty swing set, I felt a profound, chilling emptiness. My love hadn't been a gift. It had been a resource they'd exploited until it ran dry. The house wasn't just a building, it was the final testament to a life of one-sided devotion. They weren't just taking wood and brick. They were taking my history, my sister's legacy, and the last shred of hope that my sons were the good men I'd tried so hard to raise. I sank down onto the top step of the stairs, the ones I'd polished by hand just last week, and for the first time since they'd left, I allowed myself to sob. The tears weren't just for the house. They were for the devastating realization that I was utterly, completely alone. Grief is a heavy blanket. For 2 days, I let it smother me. I drifted through the house like a wraith, the silence broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that now felt like a countdown to my eviction. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't eat. I just existed, steeped in the bitter tea of regret. My sons had sent a few curt texts. "Realtor is coming Thursday at 10 a.m. Please have the house presentable." Not, "How are you, Mom?" Not, "Are you okay?" Just a command, presentable. As if I were the hired help being instructed to stage a property for their profit. The disrespect was so casual, so deeply ingrained, it was almost more painful than the grand betrayal itself. It was on the 3rd morning that something shifted. The sun streamed through the bay window in the living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. My gaze fell upon a small, silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece, one I'd overlooked in my daze. It was of Sarah and me, taken about 30 years ago on a trip to the coast. We were standing on a windy cliff, our hair a mess, laughing so hard Sarah was doubled over. I remembered that day. A storm had rolled in unexpectedly, ruining our plans. I had started to fret, to worry about the drive home, the wasted money. Sarah had just grabbed my hand, pulled me out of the car, and yelled over the wind, "Sometimes you just have to dance in the rain." "Ev!" We were soaked and shivering by the time we got back, but I hadn't felt so alive in years. Looking at her face in the photograph, her eyes sparkling with defiance, her smile wide and fearless, I felt a different kind of fire ignite within me. It wasn't the warm, nurturing flame of a mother's love. It was something colder, sharper. It was rage. Sarah wouldn't have cried. She would have fought. She wouldn't have let those two entitled boys walk all over her memory, and she wouldn't have wanted me to, either. The grief didn't vanish, but it crystallized. The suffocating blanket of sorrow began to transform into a suit of armor. I stood up, my joints cracking in protest, and walked over to the mantel. I picked up the photograph, my thumb tracing Sarah's smiling face. "You were right," I whispered to her. "They see a soft heart and think it's a welcome mat. It's time to take the welcome mat away." The numbness receded, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. I was a teacher for 40 years. I taught children how to read, how to think critically, how to stand up for themselves. I had spent a lifetime nurturing others, and in the process, I had forgotten to nurture myself. No more. I went to the kitchen and made myself a pot of strong black coffee. As I sat at the table where I'd signed away my life, I started to make a plan. My mind, which had felt so foggy and slow, was now sharp and methodical. I wouldn't be a victim in their tidy little story. I wouldn't be the sad, forgotten mother who faded into obscurity. They wanted to erase me? They would find that I was not written in pencil. I was etched in stone. They had made a critical error. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had mistaken my silence for consent. And they had forgotten one very important thing about their quiet, gentle mother. I was Sarah Parker's sister, and a Parker woman does not go down without a fight. The first step was to find out if I had any fight left to give. My hands were steady as I opened my laptop and typed a name into the search bar. Eleanor Vance, Sarah's best friend from college, a retired, no-nonsense lawyer. If anyone knew if Sarah had left behind more than just memories, it would be her. Eleanor Vance lived just 2 towns over, in a neat little bungalow overflowing with rose bushes. When I called her voice was exactly as I remembered, crisp, direct, and radiating an intelligence that missed nothing. She'd already heard about Sarah's passing and offered her condolences with a genuine warmth that pricked my eyes with fresh tears. But when I explained the situation with Mark and Jason, her warmth was replaced by an icy fury that I could feel through the phone line. "Those ungrateful little monsters," she hissed. "Sarah always worried about this. She saw the way they treated you. She agreed to come over the next morning, telling me not to touch anything and, under no circumstances, to speak with my sons or their realtor. Her command was so firm, so confident, it was the first time in weeks I felt a sliver of hope. The next morning, Eleanor arrived precisely at 9, carrying a worn leather briefcase. She was a formidable woman in her 70s, with sharp gray eyes that seemed to see right through you. She gave me a firm hug, then got straight to business. She listened intently as I recounted the scene at the dining table, her expression growing harder with every word. When I finished, she simply nodded. "The document you signed is likely a quitclaim deed, essentially surrendering your interest in the property, under duress. A court might invalidate it, but it would be a messy, uphill battle." My heart sank. "So that's it? It's over?" "I didn't say that," Eleanor said, a glint in her eye. She opened her briefcase. Evelyn. Sarah was my best friend, but she was also my client. She was one of the most meticulous people I've ever known. She loved you more than anything, and she didn't trust Mark or Jason as far as she could throw them. She knew they'd try to pull something like this. From her briefcase, she pulled out an iPad. My brow furrowed in confusion. Sarah wasn't much for technology, I said. She learned what she needed to, Eleanor replied, tapping the screen. A few years ago, after her first major health scare, we updated her will. She was worried that if she left a paper copy in the house, your sons might find it and destroy it. So, we created a digital will. It was witnessed via video conference by 2 paralegals from my old firm, notarized digitally, and filed securely online with the county probate court. It's as legally binding as if it were carved on a stone tablet. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. Eleanor turned the iPad toward me. On the screen was a pristine document titled, "The Last Will and Testament of Sarah Ann Parker." Eleanor scrolled down to the key section. My eyes scanned the words, and my heart began to pound against my ribs. I hereby bequeath my entire estate, including my property located at 12 Birch Street, its contents, and all associated financial accounts, solely and exclusively to my beloved sister, Evelyn Parker. My nephews, Mark Parker and Jason Parker, are to receive no part of my estate, as they have already received a lifetime of support from their mother, which I consider to be their inheritance. It was there, in clear, unambiguous language. Sarah's final act had been to protect me. She had seen this coming. She had laid a trap for their greed, and they had walked right into it. But the papers I signed? I stammered. Meaningless, Eleanor said with a grim smile. You cannot sign away rights to a property that was already legally and irrevocably yours from the moment of Sarah's death. The will predates their little stunt. It supersedes everything. Evelyn, she said, her voice softening. This house is yours. It has been from the start. I stared at the screen, at Sarah's elegant digital signature at the bottom. The tears that came this time were not of grief or despair. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude, of a love that had reached beyond the grave to save me. Eleanor let me have my moment. Then she became all business again. Now, here's what we do. We let them proceed. Let their realtor come. Let them start making plans. The further they go, the deeper the hole they dig for themselves. We'll file the will with the probate court tomorrow. They'll be served with a notice that will stop them dead in their tracks. They wanted the house. Evelyn, let's make sure they remember exactly why they can't have it. A fierce, unfamiliar strength surged through me. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about justice for Sarah. This was about showing my sons that their mother was not a doormat, but the rightful heir to a legacy of love they had never been capable of understanding. The next 2 days were the strangest of my life. I felt like an actress in a play, playing the part of the meek, defeated mother, while a storm of legal activity brewed beneath the surface. Eleanor filed the digital will, and the wheels of the probate court began to turn, silently and invisibly. As instructed, I let the realtor, a slick young man with blindingly white teeth, walk through the house. He spoke to me in condescending, overly simple terms, as if I were a child. "We'll want to get rid of this old wallpaper, of course," he said, waving a dismissive hand at the floral print in the hall. "And all this heavy, dark furniture. Buyers today want light, open spaces." I just nodded and smiled faintly, imagining the look on his face when he learned his commission had just evaporated. Mark called later that day. "The realtor thinks we can get a great price. Mom, we just need to clear out all of Aunt Sarah's old junk. Jason and I can bring a truck over on Saturday." "That's fine, dear," I said, my voice betraying none of the cold fury in my heart. Junk. He had called our shared memories, our family history, junk. While they planned their demolition, I began my own quiet work. With Eleanor's guidance, I started to gather evidence. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about painting a complete picture of their character for the court, should it come to that. I spent hours in the attic, digging through old boxes. I found bank statements from 20 years ago showing the large withdrawal I'd made for Mark's down payment. I found the loan agreement I had co-signed for Jason, with a stamp on it from the collection agency that had hounded me for months after he defaulted. I found birthday cards from them through the years. The last one from either of them was from 5 years ago. They hadn't forgotten. They had just stopped caring. I compiled everything into a neat folder, my teacher's organizational skills serving me well. Each document was a testament to their neglect, a paper cut to their facade of being dutiful sons. It was a painful process, reliving each sacrifice and slight, but it was also empowering. The scattered pieces of my past were coming together to form a weapon. The most difficult part was finding Sarah's old diaries. Eleanor had mentioned she kept them. I found them tucked away in a cedar chest at the foot of her bed. I hesitated to open them, feeling like an intruder. But Eleanor had insisted, if they challenge the will's validity, Sarah's own words will be our best defense. I sat and read for hours, my heart aching with every entry. Sarah had written about her fears for me, her anger at how my sons treated me. One entry, from just a year ago, stood out. Spoke to Ev today. Jason needs more money for some new scheme. She'll give it to him, of course. She would give them her last breath if they asked for it. Sometimes, I want to shake her. But that's who she is. A giver. That's why I have to be the fighter. I've made sure she'll be safe. The house will be her fortress when I'm gone. They will not get it. I'll see to it from the great beyond if I have to. Reading those words, I felt her presence so strongly, it was as if she were sitting right there with me, holding my hand. This quiet war wasn't just mine to fight, it was ours. The notice from the probate court was scheduled to be delivered to Mark and Jason on Friday afternoon. Eleanor called to tell me it was done. The process server confirmed delivery, she said. The ball is in their court now. I spent the rest of the day waiting. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't empty, it was expectant. It was the calm before the storm. At a little past 6, my phone rang. It was Mark. I let it ring 4 times before answering, taking a deep, steadying breath. Hello? What the hell is this? He roared. No preamble, no greeting. His smooth, professional voice was gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered rage. We got some letter from a lawyer, some garbage about a fake will. What did you do? I stayed silent, letting him vent. You can't do this. We have a signed agreement. We have a buyer interested already. I could hear Jason yelling in the background. The quiet war was over. The real one was about to begin. It's not a fake will, Mark, I said. My voice as calm and even as a frozen lake. It's your aunt's final wish, and it is going to be respected. The politeness was the first thing to go. The thin veneer of civility they had maintained for years cracked and shattered in a single phone call. You're delusional, Mom. Mark spat through the phone. A digital will? That sounds like something you cooked up with some senile old friend of Sarah's. It won't stand up in court. We have your signature on a legally binding document. A document you had me sign under false pretenses. Mark, I replied, my voice still level. A document that is irrelevant, because you cannot trick someone into giving away something that isn't theirs to give. The house was mine the moment Sarah passed. There was a brief, sputtering silence on the other end. I had never spoken to him like this before. I had always been the peacemaker, the one who soothed his temper and validated his feelings. This calm, immovable version of his mother was a stranger to him. You'll be hearing from our lawyer, he snarled and hung up. The next few days were a barrage of intimidation. They didn't come to the house, but their presence was a constant, menacing pressure. I received a formal, threatening letter from a high-priced law firm in the city. accusing me of fraud and attempting to probate an illegitimate document. They demanded I retract the will immediately or face a lawsuit that would, they promised, drain my every last penny. I forwarded it to Eleanor, who laughed. Standard bully tactics. All bark, no bite. They have no case, and they know it. They're just trying to scare you into folding. But their attacks became more personal. Jason, always the more emotional of the two, left me a long, rambling voicemail. It started with a wounded tone, full of phrases like, "How could you do this to your own family?" and "Don't you care about your grandchildren's future?" But it quickly devolved into a bitter tirade, accusing me of being selfish, of never supporting his dreams, of siding with a dead woman over her own blood. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, a complete inversion of reality. He painted himself as the victim, the long-suffering son whose ambitious spirit I had always tried to crush. Every dollar I had given him was twisted into an insult, a transaction meant to control him. The cruelest blow came from Susan, Mark's wife. She sent me an email with the subject line, "For your own good." In it, she suggested that perhaps I was confused in my old age, that my grief over Sarah's passing was affecting my judgment. She even had the audacity to suggest I see a doctor, and that she and Mark would be happy to help manage my affairs, to prevent me from making any more unfortunate decisions. They weren't just trying to take my house, they were trying to take my sanity, to paint me as an incompetent old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own mind. That was their fatal mistake. They had attacked my role as a mother, and I had endured it. They had attacked my financial security, and I had borne it. But when they attacked my intellect, the one thing I had cultivated my entire life as a teacher, the core of my identity, they awakened a dragon. I saved every email, every voicemail. I documented every threat. My folder of evidence grew thicker. They thought their cruelty was their weapon, but with every venomous word, they were simply handing me more ammunition. One evening, I was in Sarah's garden, pulling weeds from her beloved rose bushes. When a car pulled up to the curb, it was Jason. He got out and stood on the sidewalk, not approaching the house. He just stared at me. His face was pale. His usually confident posture slumped. The pressure was clearly getting to him. "This is ridiculous, Mom!" he called out, his voice cracking. "Just stop this. Please, you're tearing the family apart. I'm not the one who brought the wrecking ball, Jason," I said, not bothering to stand up. I just kept pulling weeds. "You and your brother did that when you treated my love like a liability and your aunt's home like a bank vault." He flinched as if I'd struck him. He stood there for a long moment, a war of emotions playing across his face. I could see the little boy I once knew, the one who would run to me with his scraped knees. But that boy was buried under layers of entitlement and resentment. He shook his head, a look of bitter disappointment hardening his features. "You've changed, Mom," he said, as if it were an accusation. He got back in his car and drove away. I watched him go, my hands covered in dirt. Yes, I thought, a grim satisfaction settling in my chest. I have. The court date was set. A probate judge would hear both sides and rule on the validity of Sarah's will. In the weeks leading up to it, a strange sort of trench warfare began. My son's lawyer filed motion after motion, trying to delay the proceedings, trying to bury us in paperwork. Eleanor batted each one away with an efficiency that was a joy to behold. "They're flailing, Evelyn," she told me over the phone. "It's the sign of a desperate party with no legal ground to stand on." Despite Eleanor's confidence, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. These were my sons. I was taking my own children to court. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. The weight of it all felt immense. Was I doing the right thing? This would be a final, irrevocable break. There would be no family dinners after this, no holiday cards, no pretense of a relationship. Restless, I found myself in Sarah's study, a room I'd mostly avoided. It was her private space, filled with books on history and travel. Her old roll-top desk stood in the corner. I ran my hand over the wood, thinking of all the hours she must have spent there. On a whim, I tried the drawers. Most were unlocked, filled with old stationery and pens. But the bottom right drawer was locked. I'd never noticed it before. My curiosity piqued. I went to the kitchen junk drawer and found a small, old-fashioned key on Sarah's key ring that I'd never known the use for. It fit. The drawer slid open with a soft groan. Inside was a single, thick manila folder. The label on it, in Sarah's neat cursive, read, "The Parker Men Financials." My blood ran cold. I lifted the folder and sat down in her desk chair, my heart pounding. Inside were documents going back years. Sarah, it turned out, had not just been worried. She had been investigating. She had hired a private investigator. The report was staggering. Mark wasn't just living a luxurious lifestyle. He was drowning in debt. His successful real estate ventures were a house of cards, propped up by high-interest loans and a second mortgage on his own home. He was on the verge of bankruptcy. Jason's situation was even more dire. His new consulting business was a sham. He had massive credit card debt and had even, the report suggested, taken out a predatory loan against his car. They weren't just greedy. They were desperate. The sale of Sarah's house wasn't for a vacation or a new boat. It was a lifeline. They needed the money to save themselves from financial ruin, a ruin they had brought upon themselves through years of recklessness and living beyond their means. It all clicked into place. Their urgency, their ruthlessness, their willingness to defraud their own mother. It wasn't just a character flaw. It was a survival tactic. They saw this house as their last chance, and I was the only thing standing in their way. There was another file in the folder. It contained printouts of emails between Mark and Jason from a month before Sarah died. Sarah must have gained access to one of their accounts. In the emails, they were already discussing the Birch Street problem. They talked about how to handle me, how to gently convince me to sign the house over, how to phrase the legal documents to avoid suspicion. Mark had written, "She'll be emotional. We just need to manage her. Make her think it's about fairness for the grandkids. She'll sign anything if she thinks it's for the family." The cold, calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. They had been plotting this while my sister was still alive. This wasn't a spontaneous act of greed. It was a premeditated crime. I closed the folder, my hands shaking with a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. The last shred of doubt I had, the last flicker of maternal pity, was extinguished. They didn't see me as their mother. They saw me as a target, an asset to be liquidated. Tomorrow in court, I wouldn't be facing my sons. I would be facing two strangers who happened to share my DNA, and I would show them no mercy. I took the folder and placed it in my briefcase next to the copies of Sarah's diaries. I finally had the full truth. Tomorrow. So would the world. The courtroom was cold and impersonal, all polished wood and muted colors, designed to strip emotion from human conflict, but the air was thick with it. I sat beside Eleanor, my back ramrod straight. Across the aisle, Mark and Jason sat with their lawyer. They refused to look at me, whispering furiously to each other. Jason was fidgeting, constantly adjusting his tie. Mark was trying to project an air of confidence, but a muscle twitching in his jaw gave away his tension. When the judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, entered, a hush fell over the room. The proceedings began. My son's lawyer went first, his voice booming with false sincerity. He painted a picture of two devoted nephews merely trying to execute the obvious intentions of their beloved aunt. He portrayed me as a grieving, confused, and easily influenced old woman, manipulated by my sister's unscrupulous friend into producing a highly suspicious digital document. He held up the quitclaim deed I had signed, calling it the only clear and tangible evidence of intent. When it was Eleanor's turn, she was the opposite. She was calm, precise, and methodical. She presented Sarah's digital will, explaining the rigorous legal protocols that had been followed to create and file it. She called one of the paralegals who had witnessed the signing via video, who testified that Sarah had been lucid, clear, and adamant about her wishes. Then Eleanor called me to the stand. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked to the witness box. I could feel my son's eyes on me, burning with hate. Their lawyer began his cross-examination, his questions dripping with condescension. "Mrs. Parker, you were very close to your sister, weren't you? Is it possible your grief is clouding your memory of these events?" "My memory is perfectly clear," I said, my voice steady. "You claim your sons forced you to sign this deed," he pressed. "Did they hold a gun to your head, Mrs. Parker?" "No," I said. "They held 30 years of my love and trust to my head. They exploited my faith in them. Some wounds are deeper than a gunshot." He tried to rattle me, to twist my words, but I refused to break. I answered each question with the simple, unvarnished truth. Finally, Eleanor began her redirect. "Mrs. Parker, you've heard your son's attorney claim they were acting out of a desire for fairness. Is that your understanding of their motives?" "No," I said firmly. I looked at the judge. "My sons were acting out of desperation. They are in severe financial distress." Mark and Jason's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! Relevance! It speaks directly to motive, Your Honor," Eleanor said smoothly. "Permission to present evidence of that motive?" The judge nodded. And with that, Eleanor walked the court through the private investigator's report. She detailed Mark's impending bankruptcy, Jason's predatory loans, their mountains of debt. A low murmur went through the courtroom. Mark's face went white. Jason looked like he was going to be sick. The final blow came when Eleanor produced the printed emails between them, the ones where they plotted how to manage me. She handed a copy to the judge and to my son's lawyer, and projected them onto a screen for the whole court to see. "She'll sign anything if she thinks it's for the family." The words hung in the air, a stark confession of their deceit. Jason buried his face in his hands. Mark stared at the screen, his mask of composure completely shattered. He looked over at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend how his quiet, compliant mother had orchestrated his public humiliation. I met his gaze and held it, my expression unreadable. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a force of nature, a promise my sister had made, and I was here to collect. Judge Miller read the emails, her face a thundercloud. She looked down from her bench, her gaze sweeping over my sons with utter contempt. "I've heard enough," she said, her voice like cracking ice. "The court finds the digital will of Sarah Parker to be valid and binding. The quitclaim deed is hereby declared null and void. This house and the entire estate belongs to Mrs. Evelyn Parker. And I would advise you two gentlemen," she added, locking eyes with Mark and Jason, "to reflect long and hard on the legal and moral lines you have crossed." She struck her gavel once. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. It was done. Walking out of the courthouse felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into the blinding light. The verdict wasn't a moment of triumphant joy. It was a moment of quiet, profound release. The weight I had been carrying for weeks, for years, had finally been lifted. Eleanor squeezed my arm. "They won't appeal," she said. "They don't have the money or the legal standing. It's over. Evelyn, you're free." Mark and Jason scrambled out of a side door, their lawyer in tow, avoiding the small crowd of local reporters who had gotten wind of the story. They were diminished, stripped of their arrogance. I watched them go, and for a fleeting second, I felt a pang of something, not pity, but a deep, sorrowful ache for the sons I had lost long before this day. The aftermath of their downfall was swift and brutal. The story of the probate case, framed as "Greedy Sons Sue Elderly Mother for Deceased Aunt's Home," was a small item in the local paper, but in our community, it was an earthquake. Mark's precarious real estate business collapsed almost overnight. Clients, spooked by the publicity and his now exposed financial instability, pulled out of deals. His business partners dissolved their agreements. He was forced to declare bankruptcy within a month, losing his large, ostentatious house in the process. Jason's fate was quieter but no less devastating. His sham consulting firm dried up. Hounded by creditors and publicly shamed, he and Karen sold their home and moved to a small apartment 2 states away, hoping to escape the shadow of what they had done. I received one final communication from each of them. Mark sent a single, venomous text message. "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed your family." Jason's was a handwritten letter, stained with what looked like a teardrop. It was full of self-pity and blame, a pathetic attempt to justify his actions. He never once said, "I'm sorry." I didn't reply to either of them. There was nothing left to say. For the first few weeks, I simply existed in the house on Birch Street. I walked through its rooms, not as a guest or a caretaker, but as its rightful owner. I sat in Sarah's garden and felt the sun on my face. I reread her diaries, not for evidence, but for comfort. But as the dust settled, a new feeling began to creep in, a sense of restlessness. The house was beautiful, a fortress of memory and love, but it was also a monument to a painful past. Winning it back had been the battle. But what was the purpose of the victory? One afternoon, I was volunteering at the local community center, a habit I'd kept up for years, serving lunch to other seniors. I listened to their stories. A woman named Doris told me how her son had moved her into a tiny, run-down apartment and taken control of her pension, leaving her with barely enough for food. A man named George spoke of how his children never visited, never called, how he hadn't seen his grandchildren in over a year. Their stories were all different, but they all shared a common thread: the quiet heartbreak of being forgotten, of being rendered invisible by the people who were supposed to love them most. And in that moment, my new purpose became crystal clear. The house on Birch Street was more than just a home. It was a resource. Sarah had left it to me to be a fortress. Now, I would use it to build a fortress for others. The victory wasn't about keeping the house. It was about what I was going to do with it. My plan began to form, not born of anger or revenge, but of a newfound clarity. I would sell the house, not because my sons wanted me to, but on my own terms. And the money would not be used to build a monument to my pain. It would be used to build a legacy of hope. The decision to sell the house felt like the final, definitive chapter of my old life. This time, I hired my own realtor, a kind, compassionate woman who listened to my story with tears in her eyes. We staged the house not with cold, modern furniture, but with the warmth and love it had always held. I told her the story behind Sarah's grandfather clock, the history of the rose bushes in the garden. I wasn't just selling a property, I was passing on a legacy. The house sold quickly, to a young family with 2 small children, whose laughter I could already imagine echoing in the halls. It felt right. The proceeds from the sale were more than I could have ever imagined. For a moment, holding the bank statement in my hand, I felt a dizzying sense of power. I could travel the world, buy anything I wanted, but those desires felt hollow, like echoes from a life that wasn't mine. My path was clear. With Eleanor's expert legal help, I established the Sarah Parker Foundation. Its mission was simple but profound: to provide legal aid and support services for elderly individuals facing financial abuse and neglect from their own families. We set up a small office downtown, hired a young, passionate lawyer, and started a hotline. The first call we received was from a man whose daughter had drained his life savings. The second was from a woman whose son was trying to have her declared incompetent so he could sell her farm. Their stories were my story. Their pain was my pain. And now, their fight was my fight. I didn't sit on a board from a distance. I was there every day. I answered the phones. I sat with our clients, holding their hands, listening to their stories. I shared my own, not as a cautionary tale, but as a story of survival. I showed them that it was possible to fight back, that kindness was not weakness, and that dignity was a right, not a privilege. I moved into a small, sun-filled apartment with a balcony big enough for a few pots of roses. It was all I needed. My life was no longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I was now able to give. I had found a new family, one forged not by blood, but by shared experience and mutual respect. We were an army of the forgotten, and we were finding our voices together. I sometimes think about Mark and Jason. I don't know exactly where they are or what their lives are like, but I know they are living in the prison of their own making, a world devoid of trust and genuine love. Their punishment isn't poverty, it's the emptiness they chose. They destroyed their family for money, and in the end, they were left with neither. My victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was here, in this small office, listening to a woman on the other end of the line weep with relief as our lawyer explained her rights. It was in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that Sarah's legacy wasn't confined to a 3-story house on Birch Street, but was alive and fighting in the hearts of strangers. They tried to erase me, to make me small and silent, but they failed. They had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all. They had shown me my own strength, and with it, I was building a world they could never touch. My life is quiet now, but it isn't empty. It's filled with purpose. The foundation has grown, helped dozens of people reclaim their lives and their dignity. In helping them, I finally, fully, healed myself. The house on Birch Street is a happy memory, not a painful one. It was a chapter, not my whole story. My sons are ghosts, figures from a past that no longer has any power over me. I chose to let go of the anger, not for their sake, but for mine. Holding on to it was like drinking poison and expecting them to die. My freedom came not when the judge's gavel fell, but when I realized my worth was not determined by my children's love or my role as a mother. It was inherent. It was mine. This journey taught me that sometimes the most loving families are the ones we build for ourselves, and that the greatest legacy we can leave is not money or property, but strength and hope in others. It's about turning our deepest wounds into a source of healing for the world. Have you ever had to fight for something you knew was rightfully yours, even when it was painful? Do you believe that true justice is about more than just winning a legal battle? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories matter, and your voice deserves to be heard. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of resilience and justice.